This video is part 2 of working with polystyrene, and in this video I'll show you how to prepare it and also how to shape it so that you can create your own 3D garden sculpture. Now if you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link up the top here so you can go across and see that before you watch this video. Anyway, let's get into it. Before we get into the video, I just wanted to point out that this is one of the places I go to if I'm just needing a few small pieces of polystyrene. And it's called My Dream Cake, and they're based in Dandenong, Victoria, Australia. And they've also got another retail store in Pakenham. So if you're passing, they're definitely well worth checking out. Now when I'm using 2 pieces of polystyrene like this one here that I'm about to cut out, I like to keep them together. And you can adhere them with these, which are the bamboo skewers, or you may actually have some display pins or long pins like that, which are great to work with. And you adhere them together, but you're making sure that when you use these skewers or the display pins that they're not going to be in the way of the hot knife, because you don't want to put them around the edge here, and then when you go to cut, they're going to be in the way and stop the hot wire from cutting through. But I tend not to use those for adhering 2 pieces together like this, because it's only a small piece. I tend to just hold it in place, and as the hot wire cuts, it melts the polystyrene, which means that it joins them together. Not a lot, you can easily separate them, but enough where you shouldn't get any movement between the 2 pieces. But that's a personal preference, whatever you like to do. In some occasions I have actually used a couple of the skewers just to adhere them together, but most times I don't. Now I've cut out my stencil, which I've used the overhead projector, and all it is a thin piece of card that I purchased from Officeworks, but you can get them from a newsagents if they're still around, but certainly Officeworks have it, or any stationery place will probably have thin card. And then I've just traced around it and then cut it out with the scalpel blade. And of course I like using the scalpel blade, but you need to be very careful because it's not a safety knife and they're extremely sharp, being a scalpel blade. So I find that it gives me a lot more freedom to turn, and I find it makes it a lot easier for me to use. But again, I'm very, very careful with it. I keep my fingers away from it. And of course, if I ever do drop it, don't grab it, just move away very quickly because it's extremely sharp. So anyway, let's get into cutting. Oh, and the other thing too is not everyone has a hot wire table like this, and if you don't, you've got a hand hot wire, then that's not an issue. You can still put your design on it, but you just have to be a bit more careful when you're taking off the amount, because with polystyrene you're either taking off a chunk or you're taking off thin slices of it, so you just go very, very carefully and you can make it work. And the other thing is, if you don't even have a hot wire, then you can use a saw, and as you get closer to the line, then you'll be a bit more careful and you'll just take off slices. You can use blades, you can use rasps, you can use lots of different things. But if you are doing it by hand, take off the big chunks with a saw, like a hand saw, and then as you're getting close to the lines, just be very careful how much you take off. But really at the end of the day, if you take off a big chunk of polystyrene and you weren't supposed to, then you can just glue it back on. So anyway, let's get into it, and I'll pin this down and then we'll start cutting it out. Okay, I'll turn the machine on, and of course when we're using a hot wire, we don't stop, we keep going, because otherwise it'll burn a hole in the polystyrene. And I just hope my pins don't get in the way because they're so big. But anyway, let's see how we go. We always start at an edge. And you just let it slide through. You don't try and control, like you control it, but you don't try and push it through. And I see my little piece of wire is scraping. And you're just guiding it. You're not forcing it, you're just guiding it. And if you do make a mistake, you just pull it away from the edge and then go back in. Okay, and then we just move it like that to get it out. I can continue on, but I just want to show you. So I'll move that away. If we were to go in from the edge like here, and we were pretty close to it, and it wasn't right, then I'd just turn it around like that, and then go back in again. Now I'm just going to bend that wire up, turn that off, because it's annoying me. Just bend that up, there you go. And then we'll go back in again. It's really quite fun. Do it outside because there's a breeze here today and it's blowing any fumes totally away from me. And like I said, don't push too hard to the card. The idea is the card is just a guide. And if you do make a mistake, it's not a big problem. There you go, and then we pull it away again quite quickly because we don't want to burn a hole in it. And that's it. And we always turn the hot wire off. And then I'll separate these. Pull those pins out the side. And this side here. There you go. And we keep those bits because these bits we might want to adhere to something else. You know, if you're creating something else, well, that would make a good fish. So we keep these big bits because with polystyrene you can take things away and you can add things, and by doing this can add some bulk that we can then carve out to be a nose or, you know, whatever the case may be. Those over here out the way. And pull all these pins out. And it's really good when you have a collection of pins, get a piece of styrene, and you just stick the pins in like that. And that keeps them all together. But because these aren't my normal polystyrene pins, I'm going to have to buy a container of dressmaking ones, and then I'll be able to do just that, put them into the polystyrene. That's if you're doing quite a bit of polystyrene, but if you're not, well then put them back in the container. And there you go, there's the two hearts. And see how the, when I cut them out, it adhered them nicely together as well. And it didn't take too much to separate them. So there you go. So the next step now is prepping them. Now before we move to the next stage, there's a few items that we're going to need. Now, before you go down the street to buy anything, just have a look around your home to see if you've got something laying around that you can use. Now, we're going to be needing a safety knife. We're going to need a straight edge. Now, I'm just going to be using this level because I have this laying around in my tool shed, but you could use a piece of cardboard or you could be using a piece of wood, anything that's going to have a fairly straight edge to it. Now, we're going to need some PVC piping and also a T-piece. I'm using 20 mil. But you can use whatever piece you have, but just bear in mind, this goes into the polystyrene, and then to have this stand up in the garden, you'll need a rod that will slide neatly into that PVC piece. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your PVC tubing. Now we're going to need adhesive, and also for this adhesive, I'm using this particular applicator gun. We're going to need a hand saw. Now, you may have a different hand saw, that's fine. Just use whatever you have before you go and buy anything, because most hand saws will probably work, and it's only for chewing into the polystyrene to cut out some lines. Okay, that's about it. Right, I've got my two pieces here of polystyrene. Now, normally I use two halves of the same thickness, but this is actually probably going to work out better for me because I actually have one slightly thicker than the other. And it's thick by about 20 mil, 25 mil, which is going to work fine because when I carve out the center of this to put in this piece of tubing, I will only need to really probably do it to one side, where normally I would do a carving on this one, on this piece here, as well as this piece here. So by having one about 20, 25 mil thicker, I think will work out fine. Now, I have also joined the two PVC pieces together with some PVC adhesive. Now, the reason why I put a T-piece in is to stop the PVC piping from pushing up through the polystyrene, which is unlikely, but I like to over-engineer rather than under-engineer. Now, previously what I've done is, in some of my earlier pieces, I've actually put a PVC cap over the top here instead of the T-piece. And what I did as extra insurance is I put another cap, the next size up, over that cap. So it was reasonably quite thick. So nothing could, you couldn't have a rod push up through into the center of there and then push up further on. So by using a T-piece, I find this works really well, and we don't have to put any caps over the end there because there's nothing going through there, so that's fine. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to now draw a center line down here. Okay, so I'm just going to get my straight edge. And I'm doing this center line and going to carve out on the thicker piece. And then I'm going to get my text and just put a bit of a line there. So we're looking for the center. Now, I'm going to also place this just approximately where I want it. Now, I'm going to make sure there's probably about 30 or 50 mil out the bottom here. It's not critical because we will be cutting this bit off later. But I do want this to be center. So I'm just going to put the area where I'm going to carve. Now, obviously, I would have to do this, if these were identical halves, I would have to do 50% of this depth in this piece and 50% of the depth in this piece on this side. But because this is a bit thicker, as I said earlier, I don't have to be too concerned about that. Now, we just want to make sure that we're pretty well down from the center. I mean, you could put that lower down if you wanted to, a little bit more, but I think that's about right there, probably 3/4 up. Now, to carve this out, I'm going to be using a safety blade, and also I'm going to be using a saw. Now, there are other tools that you could use. For instance, you might have a round file or something. I don't have one of those, but I find the saw in this works quite well. Well, that's interesting. I've just lost about a minute of the video when I was actually sawing in these straight lines. So what I've done is I've just recreated it on another piece of polystyrene, and I'll just show you what I did, and then we can then go back into the original video. So using my straight edge, I've just put it on that edge there, and I've got my saw, and I'm just going to very lightly just put it on top of the polystyrene, and I'm going to cut just into this area here where the T is, and down here, and that's it. And I'm only cutting it in just right about 5 mil, just to begin with, just to edge it. So we're doing it very lightly. And the reason why I'm using this straight edge is because I don't want to use my fingers in case I slip. And it's just to start it, because we're going to go in, and I'll put this over, actually, what I'll do is I'll use my thumb on this area here just to guide it, because it will block the camera view using the straight edge. So I'm just going in, again, on an angle, and then using my straight edge, I'll do the straight bit here in the center. We're just going to cut it, and that's about all I did, so I didn't lose much of it, and luckily I did check the video. And then all I do is, keeping your fingers very well away, I'm just going to carve this out. And I mean, you might have a better way of doing this. This is just the way I do it, and I find this really does work well for my needs. But again, it's personal opinion on how you want to do it. As long as it works for it, then it's not an issue. Handy to have a vacuum cleaner around, or what you can have is something to, you know, a short wall around you if you want to retain this polystyrene from getting everywhere. Then we use the knife in here and across here as well. And then we carve this out as well. Like I said before, it's a messy job, but if you're going to work in polystyrene, you've got to do it. Okay, we can break that away. Just get that in there, get that a bit finer. And this is what I said earlier, you know, if you've got high density polystyrene, you're not really chipping away big chunks because the balls are tighter together. And you know, these little balls can be an absolute pain, but it's part of doing polystyrene. Okay, so we'll just tip that out. So we'll put the pipe and see if we need to go deeper, which we do. So we'll go deeper. I'll use the saw for that one. So I find a handsaw works really, really well. In actual fact, this is working well on this end too. And I try and use whatever I've got at home to do this. I try not to buy any new tools just to do this, because you can, you know, you can use pretty well anything. Rather than go down the street and have to buy something new just to do one job or a couple of jobs, when you can use another tool that you've got and you improvise, is by far better than spending more money. Even though it's messy, I do like working it. Ah, we're getting there, a bit more. I must say, this end is doing a great job of carving it down, but not over carving. That's pretty well good. A bit more there, and then we'll be done. I like to have a snug fit when I do this, but you know, like I say, if it's not terribly snug, as long as it's not, you know, you don't have this huge big crater that it's going to that it's got like a 30 mil all the way around, because you don't really want that. Yep. Now we'll put the other one on top just to see how that joins. There's no gaps anywhere. So that's going to work in really, really well. But if it's not quite center, it's not really critical, because you are going to carve into this polystyrene anyway. So, okay, now what we'll do is I will now put some adhesive in here, and then we will then join these together, and then I'll leave it for a few days and come back. Okay, I've cleaned up this area. I just vacuumed it all up, and it was retained pretty good actually, because if you don't have any air, the polystyrene should stay in an approximate vicinity of where you're working. Now I've got the T-piece, so I'm now going to just add this polymer into the bottom here and really adhere this in. All on the edge there. So it's a nice snug fit. So this should adhere in really quite well. And we'll push this in. And we'll adhere around here as well. This tube is nearly empty, so this has worked in really well to get rid of all this. And I'm keeping the adhesive away, I'm not going right to the edge down here, because when I'm carving, the saw will go through this adhesive, but I really don't want to take it right to the edge down here, because I'll be carving away some of this anyway. So it's not a big problem. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply my Styro Goo, and I'm going to be putting that around the edge, around all the area here. And don't forget to wear your mask, and don't forget to wear your safety glasses as well when we begin carving it. You could use them now when you were carving that area actually, but I wasn't too concerned about that in that small area I was carving. But when I'm carving the big area, it is advisable, or when I'm carving the actual heart, it is advisable to wear your mask and that, and your safety glasses, because you really don't want to, those little balls of polystyrene are a pain. And depending on the adhesive you're using, your mask, and always read the manufacturer's safety data sheets, and preferably do it outside. Now that I'm doing the adhesive, I have a bit of a fan blowing, so I'm not getting the fumes, I'm not breathing in the fumes, but still, when you're doing this type of thing, it's best to do it outside. But it's very hot outside today, so I didn't want to do that. Okay, now what we're going to do is adhere these two pieces together. And that Styro Goo has a quick setup. It becomes it's tacky straight away. Then I'll put some weights on this, making sure it's right, which it is. So we've got a great join. It's worked really well. So now I'll put some weights on that, and then the next step will be to begin carving it.